Her daughter-in-law pawned her wedding ring for a designer purse. Maggie Linton, Navy widow and quiet homemaker, said nothing. Not when Jessica smiled wearing it, nor when Derek called it just jewelry. By month's end, their names would vanish from her trust, her deed, and every key to her estate. She'd buried a husband, raised a family, and folded betrayal like laundry. Now when they came knocking with entitlement in their eyes, the paperwork would answer first. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The box was where she'd left it. The ring wasn't. Maggie stood motionless, the late afternoon light casting long bars across her bedroom floor. The jewelry chest, maple, old and lacquered with age, sat exactly where it always had on the corner of her dresser, beneath the photo of James in his Navy uniform. But inside, nestled in the pale velvet, the oval-shaped dent where her wedding ring had slept for 43 years now, cradled only dust. Her breath caught, dry in her throat. She touched the spot gently, as if the ring might return if she handled it right. The absence wasn't just visual, it echoed, like someone had scraped away a memory. She scanned the top of the dresser. Nothing. The bathroom counter. Empty. She checked the nightstand drawer, even under the bed. Irrational, but hope never starts rational. Still nothing. By the time she reached the hallway closet, her hands were shaking. She flung open the cedar box at the bottom, the one that hadn't been opened since Lena's christening. Empty, except for old wrapping paper and the smell of mothballs. Downstairs, the door slammed open. "I'm back." Jessica's voice, all sugar and varnish, cut through the quiet like a steak knife through silk. Maggie turned toward the stairwell, just in time to see Jessica sashay in, wearing oversized sunglasses, and the kind of smile that meant she'd spent too much. Draped on her arm was a soft leather handbag, caramel-colored, with gold hardware that glinted smugly in the light. "New bag?" Maggie asked, keeping her voice even. Jessica twirled once like she was on a runway. "Early birthday gift to myself. Can't a girl indulge?" Maggie said nothing. Her gaze dropped to the boutique name embossed on the tissue paper. Jessica casually tossed on the counter. "Ainsley and Rowe." Jessica disappeared into the living room, humming to herself. Maggie waited until the noise of heels on hardwood faded. Then, quietly, she opened the kitchen trash bin. Among half-eaten yogurt cups and damp paper towels was a crumpled receipt, faint but legible. "Ainsley and Rowe. Date last Thursday. Item vintage white gold ring. Est 1975. Custom engraving. Price $2,500. Maggie blinked once, then again. Her hands didn't shake this time. They stilled completely. She didn't confront Jessica. Not yet, not with emotion still crawling under her skin like static. Instead, she folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into the side pocket of her cardigan. The next morning, she made a quiet call to an old friend. Miss Dorsey still worked part-time at the corner appraisal store, more for her sanity than the money. When Maggie entered, the old woman's face lit up, until she saw Maggie's expression. "I'm looking for information," Maggie said, slipping the receipt across the glass. Dorsey adjusted her glasses. "Ainsley and Rowe, huh?" Her eyes scanned the details. Her mouth tightened. "I remember this one. Sold last Thursday. White gold. One engraving on the inside. Still choosing you." She looked up. "It was yours, wasn't it?" Maggie nodded once, a slow, silent betrayal etching itself deeper across her face. "She came in like she was pawning off a paperclip," Dorsey added bitterly. "Didn't even blink." Maggie exhaled through her nose. "Do you remember what happened to it?" "Gone. Bought within the hour by someone passing through. Cash sale. No record." Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky had turned a dense summer gray. Maggie stood at the edge of the sidewalk, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her hands were clenched in her pockets, but inside her chest, a colder resolve was beginning to settle. She didn't cry. Not for the ring, not for the betrayal. What Jessica had taken wasn't metal. It was memory. It was the ritual of twisting that band each morning. It was James's quiet laugh when he slipped it on her finger in the snow. By the time she returned home, Jessica was lounging in the living room, scrolling her phone. Derek sat nearby, half watching sports, not really present. "I'm heading upstairs," Maggie said. Neither of them looked up. In her bedroom, she pulled out a single sheet of letterhead, her attorney's, and picked up the phone. "Russell," she said, when he answered. "I need to make some updates to the trust." Quietly. The next morning, the house was quiet, too quiet for a home with 3 people in it. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with the scent of burnt toast Jessica had left in the toaster and never returned for. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, striping the manila folder in front of her like prison bars. She opened it slowly. Her fingers paused at the page titled Linton Estate Trust, 2004 Amendment. It had her late husband's signature, hers just beneath it. Everything carefully assigned: retirement accounts, the property title, the savings bonds from the 80s. Jessica's name appeared halfway down the page, neatly typed as secondary beneficiary to Derek Linton. Maggie reached for a yellow sticky note from the drawer, wrote slowly in her deliberate even script, "Not anymore." She pressed the note firmly above Jessica's name, like a quiet act of war. Her hand didn't shake this time, but her jaw did tighten. She picked up the phone and dialed. Derek answered on the second ring, voice clipped. "Hey Mom. Everything okay? Did you know what she sold?" Maggie's voice was as calm as a frozen lake. A pause. Just the slight huff of breath on the line. "What do you mean?" "The ring," she said. "My wedding ring." He exhaled almost imperceptibly. "I think you might be mistaken. Jessica said it was some old costume piece. She lied." Maggie cut in. "And you let her?" There was a long beat of silence. Then Derek said, "Can we talk about this later? Jess and I are—" She hung up. Not with drama, not with fury, just a click. Final. Enough. 20 minutes later her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. This time Lena's name lit up. Maggie answered. "I saw it," Lena said quickly. "I didn't know what to do." She had it in her purse that morning. "The ring. I saw the engraving." Maggie swallowed hard. "When was this?" "Thursday. She told me she was going downtown to look at handbags, but I saw the receipt too. I didn't think she'd actually—" Lena's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Grandma." Maggie didn't sigh. She didn't cry. She just listened. "You're not the reason," she said gently, "but you may be the answer." There was a pause on the line. Lena's breath steadied. "What do you mean?" "I'll explain soon, but thank you for telling the truth. That already puts you ahead of them." An hour later, Russell stepped inside the house, brushing rain off his overcoat. He smelled faintly of aftershave and courthouse hallways. Maggie led him to the den without offering coffee. This wasn't a visit, it was business. "I need her removed from everything," she said without preamble, handing him the folder with the sticky note still affixed. Russell adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents with measured focus. "You're sure?" "I was sure when she sold my wedding ring to buy a purse she'll forget by next season." He gave a low whistle. "That's bold. And tasteless." "No," Maggie replied coolly. "It's theft dressed up in leather." Russell made a few notations in his tablet. "We'll have to formalize a revision. I can help draft it by tomorrow. We'll need a notary and a witness." "I'll handle the notary. You bring the pen." She saw something flicker behind his calm eyes. Admiration? Maybe, or pity. She didn't need either. When he left, the sky was starting to darken again. Kentucky summer storms always waited for the moment you stopped carrying an umbrella. Maggie walked to the desk in her upstairs study, slid a fresh sheet of paper into the printer, and printed a copy of the revised beneficiary list Russell had emailed moments ago. She folded it with surgical precision, placed it in an envelope, sealed it and wrote her name in blue ink across the front. Then, with steady hands, she addressed a certified letter to herself. Because some things, unlike rings, needed to be impossible to deny. A stack of catalogs and supermarket flyers thudded against the kitchen counter, credit card pre-approvals, glossy magazines promising youth in a jar. Maggie sifted through them slowly, her fingertips catching on cheap paper and wasted ink. None of it mattered. None of it was real. The envelope marked final copy waited on her lap, heavy with ink and intention. Down the hall, Jessica's voice rang out in shallow laughter, the artificial kind reserved for online validation. Maggie didn't need to see her screen to know what she was posting. "Look at this caption," Jessica cackled. "Finally stepped into my designer era. Hash self-made hash vintage finds." Derek mumbled something that didn't carry. Maggie didn't care. She already knew the script. Jessica would smirk. Derek would glance up and shrug. Nothing would be questioned. Nothing ever was. Maggie quietly opened her phone and scrolled to the bookmarked post. There it was. Jessica posing with the bag like it was a newborn. The lighting overdone. The filter unnaturally smooth. But what caught Maggie's eye wasn't the purse. It was the ring. Her ring. The band gleamed from Jessica's index finger, slipped on for vanity, not memory. The engraving, "Still choosing you," half visible in the close-up. Maggie's hand didn't tremble. Not anymore. She folded the final copy envelope and placed it into her handbag, then grabbed her keys. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and orange peel cleaner, a strange but oddly comforting mix. Maggie sat across from Lena, who stirred her drink absent-mindedly, the metal spoon clinking softly against the ceramic mug. "You wanted to talk about something?" Lena asked, her voice cautious but clear. Maggie smiled, but her eyes didn't soften. "Do you know what a reset looks like?" Lena furrowed her brow. "Like, starting over?" Maggie leaned forward. "No. It means stripping things down to what actually matters. It means who you are matters more than what you pretend to be." Lena stared for a long moment, then whispered, "Is this about the trust?" Maggie didn't answer directly. She reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope. Final copy. She placed it on the table between them. "This doesn't go to your father. Not yet. Not unless I say so." Lena looked at the envelope, but didn't reach for it. "Am I in it?" "You'll know when it's time." Maggie sipped her coffee. "But I will tell you this, I've stopped mistaking silence for loyalty." Later that afternoon, Maggie returned home to find a small white envelope on the porch. A delivery from Miss Dorsey, hand-delivered, likely while Jessica was out bragging somewhere. Inside was a single-page appraisal, printed clean and crisp. The ring had been appraised just 2 years ago at $11,800, noted for its pristine condition, vintage setting, and personalized engraving. There was a line scrawled at the bottom, in Dorsey's tight cursive. "You can't price grief, but this is what they got for it." Maggie stood in the foyer, staring down at the paper. Somewhere upstairs, the bathroom fan droned on. Jessica's perfume, something artificial and aggressive, drifted faintly down the stairwell. She turned toward the study and sat at her desk. With one hand she opened her laptop, the other gently tapping the edge of the appraisal. She typed in "Louisville pawn shop, plus vintage ring plus white gold engraving." It took 4 clicks. The image loaded slowly. But when it did, Maggie saw it. Her ring, unmistakable even in the dull lighting of the pawn listing. It was labeled as sold, with a price listed as final sale, $450. Not $11,800. Not even close. She zoomed in, confirming the faint curve of the engraving she'd memorized decades ago. There was no doubt. Jessica hadn't just pawned a ring. She'd discarded legacy for pocket change and a handbag. Maggie stared at the screen, her breath steady but shallow. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. She didn't cry. She clicked Save Page As, created a folder titled Proof, and closed the lid. Tomorrow, she would send the final copy to the attorney, sealed, notarized, and mailed again to herself. But tonight, she stared at the photo of the ring on her screen, and whispered, "You sold the symbol, but you never held the story." They could sell metal, not what it meant. Maggie opened the drawer, where the ring box used to sit, the same drawer she hadn't touched in over a decade, and reached to the back, fingers brushing along the velvet lining, worn soft with age. Her hand stopped at a crack in the wood, barely the width of a pencil. She slipped her finger inside and tugged gently. A folded letter emerged, edges yellowed, creases deep. Her chest tightened the way it always did when she touched James's handwriting. Even before she unfolded the paper, the smell of ink and cedar wrapped around her like a memory. She sat down slowly at the edge of the bed, the late afternoon light slanting through the window in golden bands. The letter was dated March 14th, 1983, their anniversary. It wasn't long, just 2 pages, written in that same looping style he always used when he thought deeply before putting pen to paper. Halfway down the second page, the words jumped out at her. This house is ours because we started with nothing in it. Whoever ends up here next better remember where we began, because this home was never built for greed. She traced the line with her thumb. They could sell her ring, but they couldn't touch this. She folded the letter slowly, carefully, and slid it into a new envelope with Lena's name printed on the front in crisp black ink. Then she stood, walked to the desk in the study, and placed it into the trust binder she and Russell had updated 2 days prior. She slid it behind the section titled Personal Legacy. Downstairs, she heard Jessica's voice echo up from the living room. "You know what would really open up the place," she said, speaking loud enough for Maggie to hear. "If we knocked out that whole front wall, bring in some natural light, maybe open concept it, modernize." Maggie descended the stairs, quiet as snowfall. She stood behind Jessica, who was flipping through an interior design catalog like she was auditioning for a TV show. Maggie spoke just loud enough. "Start with the deed, then ask again." Jessica looked up, startled but recovered quickly with a tight smile. "It's just an idea. And that's all it'll ever be," Maggie replied, voice steady as granite. Jessica didn't respond, but her mouth set in that pursed line that always followed when she wasn't in control. Later that evening, as twilight bruised the sky, Lena arrived with a small square gift wrapped in wax paper. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her eyes were hesitant but hopeful. "I found something," Lena said. "I made it for you when I was 8. You kept it in that old music box." Maggie unwrapped it slowly. It was a beaded bracelet, uneven plastic pearls strung with mismatched hearts, and one tiny silver charm in the shape of a house. The kind of gift a child makes when love is bigger than skill. Maggie blinked fast. Once, twice. She didn't speak. She just reached over and pulled Lena into a brief, tight hug. The smell of warm shampoo and autumn leaves filled her lungs, and for a moment it steadied her. "You remembered," Maggie whispered. "I never forgot," Lena said softly. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Russell emailed the final draft of the property title updates. Maggie read every line twice. Then, without hesitation, she signed. The house would be transferred upon her death, full title, uncontested, but not to Derek. She hovered over the confirmation button, then clicked send. Not to the son who looked away. To someone who remembered where it all began. Russell laid the file folder flat on the kitchen table, smoothing the front cover with his palm like he was brushing dust off a headstone. Maggie sat across from him, a cup of chamomile cooling between her hands. Outside, cicadas whined beneath a sky that had started turning the color of bruised plums. "It's done," Russell said. "She's gone from the trust, removed from all real estate filings. Official as of this morning." Maggie didn't nod. She just exhaled. "She'll find out soon enough," Russell added, slipping a notarized form back into the binder. "I'm counting on it," Maggie said. The next day, Maggie stood in the foyer with the jewelry chest. The same maple box that had once held her wedding ring, a pearl necklace James gave her for their 10th anniversary, and Lena's hospital bracelet from the day she was born. She ran a gloved hand across the surface, then knocked twice on the top, like saying goodbye to a friend. The museum clerk lifted it gently into a padded crate. "You're donating the full collection." "In my husband's name," Maggie replied. "James Linton, U.S. Navy, and father to one distracted son." The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That evening, Jessica's shriek ricocheted through the house like a fire alarm. "Where is it?" she yelled from the bedroom. "Where is the chest?" Maggie sat in the sunroom, folding linen napkins. Jessica burst in, cheeks flushed, that faux pitying tone already rising to hysteria. "You had no right. That box had family heirlooms. My son's legacy. You had no permission," Maggie said, not looking up. Jessica's mouth opened but no words came. Just an outraged huff as she turned and stormed out, muttering something about legal action and respect. Maggie kept folding. Later that night, Derek knocked on her door. Not a soft knock, a tentative one. That was always his way. Approach like he wanted to stand up. Speak like he needed to sit down. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" Maggie opened the door just wide enough to be seen, not heard. "Only with my lawyer present." "Come on," he said, exasperated. "You really think it has to be like this? You tell me." He hesitated. "Jess overreacted, okay? But it was just a ring. You still have everything else." Maggie stared at him so long he looked down at his shoes. "Exactly," she said. Then she closed the door. The next morning, Miss Dorsey stopped by, holding a newspaper and a grocery bag. "I brought you those licorice drops you like. And you made the front of the local society column." Maggie raised an eyebrow. Dorsey pulled out the clipping. "Local widow donates historic jewelry collection to veterans exhibit." Below the headline, a photo showed the maple chest under a glass case, labeled Linton Family Legacy, 1970s to present. "You made it permanent," Dorsey said, settling into the armchair. Maggie nodded. "No one sells it now. No one forgets it, either." Dorsey leaned in, voice soft. "That ring sat untouched for 43 years. She didn't just lose a gem, you know." Maggie looked out the window. She lost the point. That afternoon, while Jessica rearranged throw pillows with the manic energy of someone pretending to still belong, a knock came at the door. It wasn't polite. Jessica opened it to find a man in a blue blazer holding a manila envelope. "Jessica Linton." "Yes?" "You've been formally served. Removal from the Linton estate and trust. All inheritances and successor rights terminated." Her mouth opened but nothing came out. Maggie didn't watch. She didn't need to. In her upstairs study, she reviewed the revised documents, House to Lena Savings and Bonds, to Designated Charities Medical Directive, Independent Executor, Successor Trustee, not Family. Every line had changed. Every assumption had been stripped out like rot from old wood. She reached for the binder spine and clicked it shut. The dining room had never looked more artificial. Soft jazz played through a Bluetooth speaker. Candles flickered atop a too-perfect centerpiece of hydrangeas and eucalyptus. The air reeked of jasmine-scented wax and overcooked ambition. Maggie stood in the hallway, just out of view, watching as Jessica fluttered around her dining room like it was a magazine spread instead of a home. "Keep your elbows off the table," Jessica chirped to a young cousin, then turned to whisper something about Maggie's old-school manners to her sister-in-law. Maggie's heels clicked softly as she stepped into the room. The noise cut through the curated warmth like glass shattering. Conversations paused. A few cousins offered polite smiles. Derek gave a stiff wave, eyes darting between his mother and his wife. Jessica recovered fast. Too fast. "Mother Maggie," she said with theatrical warmth. "So glad you could join us. We were just about to raise a glass." Maggie glanced at the long dining table. Her dining table draped in Jessica's vision of elegance. Crystal goblets, too many forks and zero sincerity. She took her seat at the far end, straight-backed and composed. Jessica clinked her glass, clearing her throat like she was taking a stage. "I just want to thank everyone for coming. Tonight isn't just dinner, it's about family foundations, about the legacy we're building together." Maggie's eyebrow lifted slightly. Jessica continued, unfazed. "This home has meant so much to us, and we're grateful to carry on the traditions that began right here. It's about honoring the past, while stepping boldly into the future." Maggie picked up her own glass. "Here's to remembering who built those foundations." The room went still for half a beat, just long enough for discomfort to flicker in a few eyes. Jessica forced a smile. "Cheers," she muttered. Maggie took a slow sip, then reached into her bag and removed 2 white envelopes, placing them on the table with deliberate grace, one in front of Jessica, one in front of Derek. "You left something off the menu," Maggie said, her tone silk-wrapped steel. Derek glanced down at the envelope, his name typed cleanly across the front. Jessica hesitated, then tore hers open. Maggie watched the blood drain from her face as her eyes darted across the document, legal terminology stark and unmistakable. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice brittle. Derek had already begun reading his fingers tightened as he reached the signature line. Jessica shot to her feet. "You removed us from everything." Maggie nodded once. "That's correct." Jessica's voice rose with panic. "Wait, everything? The house?" Maggie's eyes never left hers. "Gone." Jessica's breath hitched. "You transferred it?" Maggie didn't answer right away. She just sipped her wine. Then she smiled. Small, composed, unstoppable. Jessica's chair screeched back from the table, her hand trembling as she held the letter like it might catch fire. Around them, the cousins grew quiet. One cleared his throat. Another pushed his plate slightly forward, unsure what to do with his hands. Derek opened his mouth, then shut it. Jessica looked at him, desperate. Say something, but he didn't, because he couldn't. Maggie placed her wine glass down, perfectly centered in its ring of condensation, then folded her napkin and rose. "I thought dinner was about honoring legacy," she said, her voice as cool as porcelain. "I'm simply doing that, thoroughly." She walked toward the doorway, the hem of her slate-gray dress brushing the floor. The silence in the room followed her like a shadow. The hallway creaked beneath Maggie's steps as she led Lena through the house, slow, quiet, like a private tour of memory. Light streamed through the front window in long golden ribbons, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. The old banister still carried the nick Derek had made, swinging a toy truck too wide. The floor tile in the kitchen still bore the faint outline where James had once dropped a coffee pot and never quite scrubbed it clean. "Someday," Maggie said softly, her hand brushing the carved wood of the stair post, "this will all be yours." Lena stopped just inside the dining room, where the table still bore the wine ring from the night before. "I don't want it like this," she said. Her voice was fragile but honest, like someone trying not to betray their own heart. Maggie turned to face her, expression steady. "Then live like it means something, not like it's owed." Lena looked down at her shoes, then back up. "I don't want to take anything from anyone." "You're not," Maggie said. "You're preserving it from people who never earned it." By noon, Maggie had settled into the sunroom with a mug of black tea. Outside, the breeze rustled the maple leaves like whispers through a chapel. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Jessica had posted again. "Jealous matriarchs clinging to old furniture and older grudges. #modern legacy #watch me build." Attached was a filtered photo of her sitting on someone else's patio, wearing designer sunglasses, sipping wine like nothing had crumbled beneath her. Maggie took one sip of her tea, then typed her reply, "Nothing to envy when it was yours once." She didn't wait to see the likes. Russell arrived just past 2, briefcase in one hand, a thick folder in the other. He smelled faintly aftershave and fresh paper, always prepared, always neutral. "Long-term care accounts finalized," he said, setting the folder down on the kitchen table. "Funded through the trust. Independent of family access. You're secure, no matter what." Maggie nodded. "And if I fall ill, you'll have what you need. Home nurses, assisted living, whatever you choose. They won't touch a cent." She glanced out the window. "I should have done this years ago." Russell offered a small smile. "Most people don't see the wolf until it's at the door. You didn't just see it, you boarded up the whole damn house." Maggie chuckled. "I never liked wolves in silk." Later that evening, as cicadas hummed their slow, rhythmic song outside, Maggie sat in the study, organizing a drawer of old photo albums. She lingered over one Lena at 6, missing a tooth, clutching a garden trowel and beaming beside a tomato plant twice her height. The edges of the photo were curling now, yellowing with time, Upstairs she heard Derek's voice, low and urgent. Jessica's sharper, cutting through like broken glass. She ignored it. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Unknown number. She tapped the voicemail. A clipped message played. This is a courtesy call. A legal challenge to the Linton estate has been filed under the name Jessica Linton. Filing timestamp 4:07 p.m. Details to follow via mail. Maggie stared at the phone a moment longer, before placing it face down. Jessica hadn't seen the buyer, hadn't seen the transfers, hadn't watched the house slip through her fingers. But now, finally, she felt it. Maggie stepped into the Jefferson County Courthouse, with her back straight, her pearl gray coat buttoned to the collar, despite the Kentucky heat. The marble floors echoed beneath her sensible shoes. Beside her, Russell walked with calm precision, a leather briefcase in one hand, confidence in the other. At the far end of the corridor, Jessica stood by the courtroom door, in a designer blazer too sharp for the occasion, lips pursed, eyes flicking toward Maggie, like she was checking for weakness. Derek lingered behind her, gaze fixed on a speck on the wall. "Ready for your little show?" Jessica called out, voice loud enough to draw glances. Maggie didn't break stride. "I don't do shows," she said, "just endings." Inside, the courtroom was all polished oak and cold air conditioning. Jessica took her seat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by a lawyer who looked far too polished for how little substance he'd soon have to work with. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Jessica's attorney rose, speaking in firm tones about diminished capacity, undue influence, and questionable last-minute estate amendments. He painted Maggie as a confused widow, manipulated by opportunistic parties, namely Lena and Russell. "She's in her late 70s, the lawyer said, with no formal medical clearance, proving her clarity at the time of these dramatic revisions. We believe the documents in question were created under emotional distress and should be considered invalid." Jessica nodded along, a tear perched strategically in her right eye. Then Russell stood, calm, methodical, razor precise. "Your Honor, we anticipated this, and we prepared." He opened the folder on the table, revealing printed letters, time-stamped revisions, notarized paperwork, and a sealed affidavit from Maggie's physician, confirming full mental acuity. He clicked a remote. A projection screen blinked to life, displaying a video. Maggie's voice filled the courtroom, clear and steady, recorded just 3 weeks ago. In the footage she read aloud the revised trust, explaining her reasoning line by line, voice measured, gaze direct. "This is my decision," the video, Maggie said, her voice unmistakably sharp. "I am not confused. I am not pressured. I am choosing legacy over convenience." The silence that followed was louder than any objection. Then came Miss Dorsey's testimony. She walked to the stand in her pale blue cardigan and orthopedic shoes, one hand gripping her cane, the other steady on the Bible. Once sworn in, she sat tall. "She came to me about the ring," Miss Dorsey said. "Knew every detail, weight, year, engraving, knew what it was worth, but more importantly, what it meant. That's not someone in decline. That's someone remembering exactly who she is." Jessica shifted in her seat, arms crossed, the performance unraveling. The judge, a stone-faced woman in her 60s, adjusted her glasses and took a long moment before speaking. "I've reviewed all submitted materials, including the video, medical documentation, and notarized forms. There is no evidence of coercion or mental instability. The documents are legally sound. This court rules in favor of the defendant. Case dismissed." The gavel fell like thunder. Jessica gasped, loudly. "This isn't fair." She started rising from her seat. The judge raised a finger. "Sit down, Mrs. Linton." Derek didn't move, didn't speak. Outside the courthouse, the sunlight was blinding after the courtroom's gloom. Maggie stepped out first, greeted by Lena waiting at the bottom of the steps with arms open and tears in her eyes. They embraced without a word. Behind them, Jessica stormed through the doors, phone already in hand. Derek followed, his shoulders slumped. Russell walked over and handed Derek a manila envelope. Derek frowned. What's this? Russell offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Invoice. For 5 years' worth of unpaid rent. Interest included. Per your mother's legal rights as sole owner. Derek's mouth opened, but Russell had already turned away, adjusting his watch and catching up to Maggie and Lena. The courthouse doors closed behind them, but for Jessica and Derek, something far bigger had just shut for good. The eviction notice was hand-delivered at 9:03 a.m. Russell and a court officer stood just outside the front porch, while Maggie watched through the parlor window, arms folded, expression unreadable. The envelope was thick and embossed with gold trim, formal, final, and impossible to ignore. It felt almost theatrical, but Maggie insisted on dignity, even in demolition. Jessica opened the door in a silk robe and sunglasses, as if shielding herself from truth more than sunlight. What is this? She snapped. Notice to vacate, Russell said evenly. Filed, stamped, and upheld. You have 60 days. Jessica laughed, dry, high-pitched, and hollow. This is elder abuse. You can't just throw us out of our home. Maggie didn't move from the window, but she didn't blink either. That afternoon, Jessica's fingers flew across her phone like a concert pianist, summoning a concerto of pity. Post after years of loyalty, we're being forced out by an elderly relative. It's cruel. It's wrong. Please share if you believe family is sacred. #elder abuse #modern orphans. It went viral, briefly. Sympathy flooded in for the first hour. Shares, likes, even offers for GoFundMe support. Until someone posted the screenshot of Jessica's old handbag post. Until someone found the pawn shop listing. Until someone shared the court ruling. And the video. The tide didn't just turn, it crashed. Comment after comment peeled away the facade. You stole her ring. You pawned a family heirloom for a purse. Wait, didn't she donate the jewelry to a museum? The internet once her performance stage became her trial. Maggie didn't say a word. Not to reporters, not to neighbors, not even to Lena. Instead, she made a quiet call to the Louisville Women's Renewal Shelter. The next day, a check arrived, $45,000, marked as a tribute gift. Recipient Jessica Linton, in honorarium. It went into the press release. Local papers covered the story under a photo of smiling women standing in front of the shelter's newly renovated kitchen. Maggie clipped the article and tucked it into a folder labeled Legacy, Community. That evening, Lena visited, still in her university sweatshirt, backpack slung over one shoulder. You donated that money in her name? She asked. Eyes wide. On purpose. Maggie nodded, stirring sugar into her tea. Yes. Lena hesitated. Was that kindness? Maggie's spoon paused. Sometimes, she said, they match. Jessica stormed into the house that night like a hurricane with no eye, just chaos. Her hair was wild, eyeliner smudged from either rage or too many social media meltdowns. You used my name? She shrieked. For a charity? I've got people calling me generous. Me. Maggie looked up from her crossword. You're welcome. Jessica slammed her fist on the hallway table. You think this is funny? Humiliating me? No. Maggie said, folding the paper neatly. I think it's poetic. Jessica spun toward the stairs, but Russell's voice came from behind her. You might want to read this before you unpack. She turned to see him holding a cream-colored envelope. Legal seal. She yanked it from his hand, tearing it open like it owed her money. Her lips moved as she read, and then her whole face dropped. No contact order? She breathed. You filed a restraining order? Russell nodded. Civil and enforceable. For the safety and dignity of the trustee, which I remind you is not you. Jessica looked to Derek, who stood at the base of the stairs, but he just stared blankly, caught between loyalty and survival, as always. Get your things, Maggie said calmly, and this time take what's actually yours. Jessica's jaw quivered, but she turned. She climbed. And upstairs, the sound of drawers slamming was the last music Maggie ever wanted from her. The envelope was ivory, thick stock, and sealed with a gold foil sticker, just fancy enough to feel insulting. It was sitting atop a stack of junk mail, tucked neatly between a coupon booklet and a donation request from the American Heart Association. Maggie stared at the name on the return address, Callie Berman, Jessica's cousin, and occasional social media mouthpiece. She slid it open with a letter opener shaped like a feather. The card inside was trimmed in lace and smelled faintly of fake rosewater. "You're invited. A farewell gathering for Margaret Linton, a celebration of life while she's still here to see it. Hosted by Callie Berman and friends of the Linton family. Saturday 6 p.m. The Oaks Social Club. Dress, pastels preferred. Let's honor her before it's too late." Maggie blinked, once, then twice. Her name, her life reduced to pastel-themed pity, and a club she hadn't set foot in since Reagan was in office. Her first instinct was silence. Then she remembered Jessica's voice screeching about public image, about narrative. She wasn't dead, but apparently they'd decided she should act like it. Lena called before Maggie could even put the card down. "Did you get it?" Her voice was tight, urgent. "I did. They're trying to flip the story again, make it look like they're caring for you. Sympathy posts have already started going up." Jessica shared a throwback photo of you holding Derek, captioned, "Before it all changed." Maggie's jaw clenched. They always preferred performance over truth. Lena sighed. "You're not going, right?" "Oh, I'll respond," Maggie said, her voice like velvet drawn across stone. "But not with attendance." The florist on Maple Street had known her for 30 years. The woman didn't blink when Maggie requested black lilies, calla blooms, and sprigs of blue thistle, all bundled tightly in a glass box arrangement. "What's the occasion?" the florist asked gently. "A funeral," Maggie replied. "Apparently mine." The note card was small, just enough room for 4 words, written in her unmistakable hand. "See you in court." Saturday came with rain that spit rather than poured, just enough to stain silk dresses and curl heavily sprayed hair. Photos from the event trickled online in filtered splendor, Jessica dabbing fake tears, Callie posing with a slideshow of Maggie's legacy, Derek looking lost behind a mimosa. Maggie, meanwhile, sat by the window in her reading chair, thumbing through an old gardening book and sipping dark roast. At dusk, Derek arrived, alone. His shirt was damp at the collar, his tie askew, the plastic sleeve from a bouquet stuck awkwardly out of his coat pocket. He looked older than usual, less like a grown man, and more like a boy who'd lost his compass. "I didn't know they were going to do all that," he said, voice low. Maggie nodded once, just once, then handed him a sealed envelope from the small drawer beside her chair. He stared at it. "What is this?" "Something your father wrote, the day before his surgery." Derek hesitated, then sat. He unfolded the letter with trembling fingers, reading in silence as the room grew thick with stillness. Maggie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Halfway through the second page, his shoulders collapsed inward. His hand flew to his mouth. The letter shook in his lap as tears began to fall. Quiet, childlike. He looked at her, eyes red. "Why didn't you ever show me this?" "Because you wouldn't have read it," she said softly. "Not then." Derek nodded, stood, and without another word walked to the door. He paused on the threshold. "I miss him." Maggie's voice didn't waver. "Then stop living like he'd be proud of this." The door closed behind him. Later that night, Maggie pulled out a new file from her locked drawer, thicker than the rest. On the front, Educational Trust. Lena Linton, status active now. She clicked her pen open, and signed. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the garden in a layer of soft white that made everything feel new, even the old. Maggie sat on the sunroom's window bench, watching Lena crunch up the walk with a scarf looped twice around her neck and gloves too big for her hands. She still hadn't outgrown her habit of looking down when she was nervous. Inside, the air smelled of nutmeg and pine. Maggie had set the kettle to boil and pulled 2 ceramic mugs from the back of the cupboard, the ones James had bought from a roadside potter in Asheville, both chipped in the same place. "I brought your favorite," Lena said, unzipping her coat and holding up a box of shortbread. "The buttery kind, not the cheap stuff." Maggie smiled. "Bravery works better when you don't announce it." They sat in silence for a while, just the clinking of tea and the quiet crackle of the radiator. Then Maggie reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, the edges softened by time. "This was the last letter he ever wrote me," she said. "It wasn't meant to be the last, but time isn't always interested in what we meant." Lena took it carefully, as if the weight of the page might break it. She opened it slowly, reading the first line in silence. "I've heard about the ring," Maggie continued, eyes still fixed on the snow. "How she sold it. How it ended up on someone else's hand." Lena looked up. "I hate that she did that." "She didn't just sell a ring," Maggie said. "She tried to sell the memory of a snowstorm in 1965. James had just come home on leave. I was standing right there." She pointed out the window. "Right in that garden, knee-deep in snow and refusing to wear gloves." Lena gave a small laugh. "He held out this little box," Maggie continued, "and said, 'If you say yes, I'll never let you be cold again.' I said yes, and he never broke the promise." A silence stretched between them, warm and weighty. "They'll never understand," Lena whispered, almost to herself. "That's the difference," Maggie said. "You don't need them to." Lena folded the letter back with care, then held it against her chest like it might disappear. Maggie held up her left hand, where a slim silver band rested. No diamond, no engraving, just clean polished metal. "I bought this at a farmer's market for $15. Wears better than gilt." Lena nodded slowly, eyes shining. That evening, Maggie stood behind a wooden podium in a small public library meeting room, lit by warm can lights and filled with an audience of 30, mostly women, mostly older. Some had walkers, some wore scarves over thinning hair. She adjusted the microphone and began. "I was told once that we're only valuable if someone else decides we are, that our memories, our legacies, and our names are handed down through approval. I don't believe that anymore." A quiet hush settled over the room. "They sold my wedding ring," she said plainly, "but I never sold myself." A murmur, then stillness again. "Don't wait to be honored. Honor yourself in ink, in action, in witnesses who saw you try, fail, and still stand." When she stepped down from the podium, a woman in the front row gripped her hand, tears streaming. "I left him last year," she said. "You just helped me bury the guilt." Maggie squeezed her fingers gently. "Then dig up something better." The next morning Lena sat on her dorm bed, phone in hand, textbook forgotten in her lap. Louisville Tribune lifestyle section, widow turns betrayal into generational strength. Maggie Linton's quiet revolution. A photo showed Maggie in grayscale, standing on the library steps, silver band visible, expression unreal. Lena smiled and whispered aloud, "They really never understood, did they?" But she did. The pen hovered over the final line of the contract, its tip poised like a fuse waiting for flame. Maggie didn't rush the moment. Let them all call it petty if they wanted. This was peace, printed on thick linen paper with binding signatures and zero apologies. Russell stood beside her at the long walnut table in the bank's conference room, his reading glasses low on his nose, the faintest curve of satisfaction playing on his lips. "This is the last parcel," he said. "The 2 commercial units tied to Derek's old LLC. In your name now. Clean title." All liens settled. Maggie signed, her initials sharp, deliberate. "Finalize it." Russell passed the papers to the notary, who stamped them with a mechanical thunk that echoed off the paneled walls like a drumbeat. Outside, wind rustled the branches of a dogwood tree, shedding early autumn petals like confetti. Maggie rose from the chair, smoothed the front of her coat, and walked toward the exit with the quiet weight of a woman who had just pulled the last thread from a tapestry no longer hers to mend. 3 weeks later, the sales proceeds had already found new homes, just not the ones Jessica might have imagined. Maggie divided the funds between 3 local nonprofits, a rural literacy initiative, a Black women's history archive, and a scholarship program for displaced students. Each donation was made in the name of the James and Margaret Linton Foundation, its brand new bank account now bigger than Jessica's boutique budget would ever be again. She'd included a note with the archive gift, because stories are safer in libraries than in liars' mouths. Jessica's downfall didn't arrive with a bang, but with a whisper in the form of a quiet IRS audit. The luxury handbag account had long been her vanity project: custom logos, cash deals, no books, no accountants. The lawsuit didn't go viral. It crept first as a rumor in her social circles, then as a screenshot on a fashion blog. Emerging brand JL and Company faces tax evasion charges after whistleblower It didn't name Maggie. It didn't need to. Miss Dorsey arrived with a pound cake wrapped in wax paper and her usual blunt observations. "They're unraveling faster than cheap lace," she said, placing the cake on the counter. "Jessica's trying to backpedal so fast, she might break her heels." Maggie chuckled, a low, real sound that shook the window glass. She hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe longer. Dorsey tilted her head. "Your laugh still sounds like victory." Maggie wiped the corner of her eye. "Because I waited until it meant something." They sat in the kitchen together, slicing the cake, watching birds bounce on the bare branches outside. Dorsey reached for the radio, turning on an old swing record. The music filled the air with something that felt like Saturday mornings and second chances. That night, Maggie returned to her study, pulling out the manila folder labeled Estate, Finalization. She flipped through page after page, each one proof of a life protected, not surrendered. She reached the last page and paused, then smiled. It was done. She closed the folder and placed it in the fireproof safe beneath the floorboards, the one James had installed in 1984 with the warning, "Only use this when it matters most." Maggie locked the safe with a satisfying click. As she turned to leave, the mail slot clattered. She stepped into the hallway and retrieved a single envelope from the floor. Cream-colored, handwritten, to Grandma. The return address, Lena Linton. She opened it slowly, the scent of dried lavender escaping from the folds. Inside was a delicate wedding invitation, inked in navy script. "Please join us for the wedding of Lena Marie Linton and Grace Elise Moreau. Spring equinox. Family garden, Louisville." Maggie's heart didn't pound. It bloomed. The air was thick with honeysuckle and memory. Wind stirred gently through the garden trellis, fluttering the linen ribbons tied to every chair. Early spring light glinted off the rows of glass jars lining the aisle, each filled with soil from different places. Lena and Grace had called home. Louisville, Asheville, Santa Fe, and one marked simply Grandma's backyard. Maggie sat near the front, dressed in navy silk with silver beads at the cuff. On her wrist she wore no diamonds, no brooches, just a simple gold watch James had given her on their 25th anniversary, ticking quietly over her pulse. Then came Lena, hair pinned with small white lilies, her dress simple and fluid, like it had grown from the earth itself. Around her neck hung a slender silver chain, and at its end Maggie's ring, not displayed, not flaunted, just there, close to her heart. As Lena reached the arbor, she turned slightly, locking eyes with Maggie, the kind of look that held generations between the lines. Maggie exhaled, steady and full. They'd tried to steal her worth once. Now she watched it walk proudly down the aisle. Before the ceremony, in a quiet moment beneath the dogwood tree, Maggie had pressed a small velvet pouch into Lena's hand. "Something new," she whispered. "Not touched by betrayal. Not even once." Inside was a pendant, a tiny carved locket in the shape of a magnolia bloom. Inside, tucked behind clear glass, was a folded sliver of the letter James had written the day before his surgery. Just one sentence, chosen carefully: "You carry more of us than you know." Lena had blinked back tears. "I don't have words." "You don't need them," Maggie said. "You're writing your own." At the back of the garden, Derek sat alone, jacket rumpled, tie askew. He hadn't approached Maggie, not once. His eyes followed Lena like they were trying to remember how she'd grown without him noticing. Jessica's name wasn't even mentioned in the ceremony. No seat reserved. No explanation offered. The absence didn't need justification. It had become its own kind of presence. As vows were exchanged and applause scattered through the air like confetti, Maggie glanced around the crowd. Familiar faces, some wrinkled with time, others fresh and curious, and all of them stood for her as she was helped to the small wooden platform for her toast. Not out of pity, but respect. She raised her glass, her voice calm and clear. "There's something I've learned about love," she said, eyes moving across the crowd and landing on Lena. "It's not about what you receive, it's about what you guard, what you refuse to sell, what you choose to protect when no one's watching." She paused. "Love earned and kept is worth more than diamonds, and far harder to replace." A ripple of quiet followed, then a swell of applause. Grace reached out and took Lena's hand, lacing their fingers. Maggie sat back down, heart full but steady, like a song finally reaching its last true note. After the final slice of cake was served and the lights began to dim, Maggie returned home with the silver chain tucked into her coat pocket. She walked slowly through the house, fingers grazing the frames on the wall, the banister, the edges of worn doors. Then she entered her study. From the locked drawer beneath the file cabinet, she retrieved a new folder marked Will, Final Addendum. She sat beneath the reading lamp, opened the page and took out her pen. The ink flowed cleanly this time, no hesitation. She rewrote the last clause. "The home is to remain in the family, but never to be treated as property. It is not a possession. It is a memory with walls. And it now belongs forever to the first woman who never asked for it, Lena Marie Linton." She signed, sealed it and tucked it into the binder. Then she whispered, "That's how you reclaim a name." The papers made a soft sheesh as Maggie slid them into place. Trust documents, donation confirmations, Russell's quarterly reports, and Lena's newly signed inheritance deed. She labeled the thick tab in clean blue ink. Done, not to be reviewed, not pending signatures, just done. She sat back in her chair, listening to the soft whir of the study fan overhead. The drawers around her were finally quiet. No more shuffling, no more shifting, no more secrets, shoved between loose receipts and forgotten promises. Everything had a place now. She picked up the digital recorder Russell had gifted her on her last birthday. A just-in-case gesture, he'd called it. She clicked the red button. "Lena," Maggie began, her voice soft but unwavering. "You knew before anyone else." A long breath. "Not about the ring. Not about the house. About me. You saw past the roles they put on me. Mother, in-law, obstacle. You saw the person underneath. You never needed to pretend." A pause. The sound of distant wind chimes drifting through the window. "I don't know what they'll say about me later. But you'll know what's true. That's all the legacy I need." She clicked the recorder off and placed it in a fireproof envelope marked personal. For Lena. She slipped it into the back of the safe, behind the folder labeled Will. Final. Then she stood, bones creaking quietly, and stepped out into the garden. The morning light slanted across the yard in warm gold bands. Daffodils had started to bloom beneath the bird bath, and the hydrangeas she and James had planted all those years ago were pushing new buds, stubborn and sure. Maggie ran her hand over a worn patch of wood along the fence. She could still see him here, James in flannel, laughing at a broken shovel, dirt under his nails. The love hadn't faded with the photographs or the ring. It had rooted itself deeper. Ring or not, love had outlived everything. Russell arrived mid-morning, sleeves rolled, tie slightly askew, like he'd wrestled with Louisville's parking meters again. "Final report," he said, handing her a leather folder with a single gold clip. "All accounts transferred. All designations secure. You're officially the most thorough client I've ever had." Maggie smiled and tapped the folder. "There's power in being underestimated. They never saw it coming." Russell chuckled. "Well, they see it now. Clear as ink." He paused at the door before leaving. "You did it, Maggie." "I know," she said, brushing a speck of dust from the counter. And not out of bitterness, out of clarity. That afternoon, Miss Dorsey brought over a fresh rhubarb pie and a weathered book of pressed flowers. She set both on the table and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know what I realized?" she said. "You didn't lose that ring, you shed it. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Dorsey nodded. Like a tree dropping a leaf. You didn't get smaller. You made space. Maggie poured 2 cups of tea, letting the steam rise between them. I kept everything I needed, she said, and lost nothing that mattered. They sipped in companionable silence, the pie untouched. That night, Maggie tucked herself into bed, without checking her phone, without glancing at the clock, without locking the hallway door like she used to. The fan whispered above her. Outside, wind brushed through the leaves in long, even breaths. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, sleep found her completely. No ghosts, no weight, just peace. The next morning, across town, Lena returned from her morning class to find an envelope in her mailbox, stamped from the Kentucky Office of Legacy and Trusts, no return name. She stood in the stairwell, heart hammering, fingers trembling slightly as she slid a nail beneath the seal. Inside, a letter. A single page. At the bottom, her name, bold, centered, and something she never saw coming. Lena sat on the floor of her apartment, legs crossed, back against the couch, the morning light casting soft gold across the hardwood. The envelope still lay in her lap, its contents unfolded now, crisp and official. Her name was there, typed at the top. Beneficiary: Lena Marie Linton. Estate execution, early distribution, approved effective date, immediate. She blinked, reread, then again. A second page slipped from behind the first, thicker paper, handwritten ink, Maggie's handwriting, slanted and exact. Lena, because I saw you see me. The real me, not just the version they tolerated or manipulated. That's what legacy means. Not what you leave behind, but who you leave it to. Use it well. Use it loudly. Lena pressed the paper to her chest, and let the moment rise in her throat. Not grief, not shock, relief, like something had finally made it to shore. That afternoon, Derek called, twice, then a third time, then one more. After a long pause, his number flashing across Lena's phone like a ghost trying to knock. She stared at the screen as it buzzed, relentless, pleading. Then she tapped block. The screen dimmed. Silence returned. Later that evening, Jessica's Instagram lit up with a post, a filtered photo of her hand holding an empty ring box, captioned, "Some pieces are just missing forever. Some things never should have been taken. #loss #family. Should matter #unspoken pain." It got 3 likes. 2 were bots. One was Callie. An hour later the post vanished. 3 days passed. Then the fund launched. Margaret's Memory, a legacy for women left out. A nonprofit grant initiative aimed at women across Kentucky who had been disinherited, erased, or excluded from family estates due to manipulation, coercion, or silence. The mission was clear. When they try to write you out, write yourself back in with ink and power. Within a week, the fund raised $25,000. By the second week, national syndicates picked it up. Granddaughter of local widow turns betrayal into justice platform. The press photos showed Lena in a navy blazer, Maggie's pendant around her neck, chin high. On a clear April morning, Miss Dorsey made the quiet walk through Oak Hill Cemetery. The grass was still wet with dew. Cardinals chirped in nearby dogwoods, and a breeze carried the distant scent of blooming hyacinths. She knelt beside Maggie's stone, simple, elegant. Margaret Linton, 1947, 2025. She remembered everything. Dorsey reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, smooth river stone. She'd carved it herself, carefully, slowly, into the shape of a ring, not ornate, just round, whole. She placed it on top of the headstone and whispered, "They never knew the shape of your story." She sat beside the grave, resting her back against the cool marble, and chuckled softly to herself. "You should have seen them now, Maggie. You'd laugh too." Somewhere nearby, Lena stood at the edge of the garden Maggie had once tended. She was holding a clipboard, going over preliminary zoning plans for a community workshop space that would sit right where the hydrangeas bloomed. She looked toward the back porch, still creaking, still holding memory in every nail. She reached into her pocket and traced the edge of Maggie's letter again, and smiled. Because in the end it wasn't the silver or the signatures, it was the fact that Maggie had written the final chapter herself, and signed it not with rage, but resolve. She sold my wedding ring for a handbag. I sold her inheritance, and bought myself peace.